That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Finally.
The 1966 classic and directorial debut of Mike Nichols, which is insane to me still that this was his debut. Of course, adapted from the Edward Albee play, which won 5 Oscars, nominated for several more, and we happened to see on the big screen for the first time in my life in Los Angeles on November 20th.
Yeah, which was fun. Mm-hmm. So I think if someone were to run through all of our videos, there are probably 2 movies that get, 3 I think that get referenced the most.
Which are?
Aliens.
Okay.
Suddenly Last Summer. Mm-hmm. And then I think by a long shot it would be
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? So many people have said we should review this film.
It is a favorite of mine. I read this play for the first time. I discovered Tennessee Williams and Edward Albee. You know, these at the time they were writing, 50s and 60s. These playwrights were household names, which playwrights aren't anymore. But I read this and I tried to have a production put on in 5th grade. And I actually went through a copy of the play and tried to, because it's littered with profanity, ignorantly not realizing that this play is infamous for its profanity. But I've just always been fascinated by it. Even as a kid, though, I didn't kind of understand the magnitude of everything that's going on within it.
So the basic story revolves around George and Martha. Mm-hmm. Martha's played by Elizabeth Taylor and George is played by Richard Burton. Mm-hmm. And at the time, those 2 were actually married in real life. Mm-hmm. But they play a married couple.
Her 5th husband, who she divorced and remarried.
Yes.
After this film, yeah.
So they play a married couple who... Where do they live? What state?
I don't think it's exactly specified.
Okay. It seems like they'd be in the South, maybe. But maybe not. I don't know. I'm making assumptions. But Richard Burton's character, George, he is an associate professor of history at a college that Elizabeth Taylor's dad is the president of. Mm-hmm. But they're miserable together. They're miserable in every aspect of their lives. And we find them on a night after they've done like a social thing for work where a new professor has joined the college, played by...
George Segal,
Nick, played by George Segal, and he is a math professor. And Elizabeth...
No.
Oh, no, that's the joke, is that he's in the math department, but he's a biology professor. Mm-hmm. Elizabeth and Richard, George and Martha have invited...
Martha's invited them over.
Nick and his wife, played by Sandy Dennis. What's her name?
Honey.
Have invited them over for like a nightcap. Mm-hmm. And it just devolves. Like, it's just all night long, all these people are doing...
is drinking profusely.
And George and Martha are putting on a show. They are vile to one another. Then they've sort of become vile to the other couple. Secrets are revealed. Mm-hmm. And it sort of ends kind of where it started, except they've destroyed this other couple. But we can get into the details. I think the film... There's just so much about this I like. Mm-hmm. It's hard to think what to talk about first, but I think the opening scene is so interesting because it starts with Martha, Elizabeth Taylor. They come in from wherever party they were.
Drunk already.
And their house is a wreck. And she goes, "What a dump." And then she's asking George, "What movie is that from?" "I don't know." "You know what it is. It's a Bette Davis movie." Mm-hmm. "What is the movie?" And they're arguing about it. And I think it's so interesting because, nowadays you would just get on your phone and be like, "Oh, it's what is the movie?"
Beyond the Forest. It's an infamous film in Bette Davis's filmography as well, for other reasons.
But it's just such a great moment in this film that really could only... It's such, I don't know, it's like a time capsule kind of thing that I think is so effective.
It's a time capsule in a lot of ways. I think it's important to note that this film was the final nail in the coffin of the Hollywood production code, which, had a list of things you couldn't portray on screen. One of them was homosexuality, and foul language was the last thing to go because of this film, and that is when the industry started to segue into what would become the MPAA.
What did you think their house smelled like? That's all I kept thinking.
I also know I didn't want to be in it, but when she's like masticating that chicken leg, talking about Bette Davis, it's also interesting. it's in black and white because they have this makeup on to make them both appear a bit older. But it's shocking to realize that Liz was, I think, only 34 at the time, and Richard Burton was early 40s, 41, I think.
I would have guessed he was in his late 50s, and I would have guessed she was in her like late 40s.
Yes, they're made to look
Wow.
They're drunks, and they're chain smoking. Yeah.
Okay, so Sandy Dennis is so perfect.
Yes, she is.
She looks sick. She looks.
It also won an Oscar for cinematography, and Haskell Wexler's really getting like the sweat on her face because
she I mean, I know that she struggled with alcoholism in real life, but she does such a good job.
So did Richard,
of playing a drunk, and Richard Burton is just perfect. He reminded me in that role of like I could see Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah.
Doing that role. So the night starts with. It's clear George has like resentment towards Nick being there because Martha describes him as sort of like a young, fit guy. And so immediately George is defensive against Nick. And what I love so much about George's character is when we first meet him, we think he's like a pushover.
Defeated. Yeah.
Like defeated, and his wife just like literally just runs him over. But pretty quickly we realize George is not to be played with. He will hurt your damn feelings.
But that's when Martha likes him the most. She gets excited when she gets a rise out of him. Yeah.
And it's, oh gosh, it's just so good because these people are so hyperbolic, but somehow the writing is so, the writing's so good because somehow we still relate. Like, even, like whether or not you're in a relationship or like I've been married for a long time, it's like, I relate so much to how these people are acting. It's just on a very ridiculous level. But the way it's written, it's invoking so many things because I'm frustrated by these people. I'm uncomfortable by what they're saying. And I also feel like I would like to say that.
I'm enthralled by these people. I don't want to be them per se, but there are elements, of course, that are aspirational.
So when Nick realizes like, oh boy, like this is a problem, and then he asks like, why are you doing this?
There's one more, I think he's even off the screen where you hear George Segal being like, why do we have to go through this?
And then George says, well, it's exercise, like we're working out our wits. And I thought that was the perfect line to describe this film. It's like these two characters just exercising their wits.
And there's a reason that they kind of can't just leave either, because Martha is a powerful, she's kind of the center point here that both men, their careers and their livelihoods
depend on.
Yes.
And it's clear Nick wants to climb the ladder, like literally and figuratively.
So he's responding to Martha's obscenities, I guess, in a positive manner.
So I think like if you've ever been around a couple who kind of have a tendency to, jab at each other, I think there's always a line that clearly the couple should know they shouldn't cross. And then as a spectator, we can recognize when a line has been crossed. And the first time a line is crossed is George has made Martha upset because he's ribbing at her. And she says, I want to talk about a boxing match. And then she describes a time when her and George like were boxing and he didn't want to, and she put on gloves and she knocked him out.
And he's rummaging around in like the storage closet and gets a rifle.
And then he finds a rifle and comes out and points it at the back of her head. And Honey starts screaming, and then everyone freaks out. And George pulls the trigger, and it's an umbrella. I thought that was so good. It was so good because it's like, bitch, I wish I could kill you.
But then she liked it. She wants to kiss him after that.
Yeah, she's excited, and then he tells her, like, he pushes her away. Oh, the games they play. So things get really heated. Everyone's super drunk, and George and Nick go outside. Well, George goes outside to kind of like sulk.
Sandy Dennis has thrown up at this point.
She's become sick. Yes, Honey has become sick
because
Martha's tending to her.
Yeah, Richard Burton takes her and starts swinging around dancing.
Yeah, so
and he calls her so many vile things like monkey nipples and
talking about how she doesn't have any hips. And... but. So George is outside sulking, but he's being methodical. So Nick comes out to maybe console him, and they start talking, and George is trying to get information from him, and he does. Nick shares that Honey has money. He tells this really interesting story about Honey's dad was like an evangelist, but like was also rich and left her a bunch of money. And then he also shares that Nick only married Honey because she was pregnant. But then George is like, but you don't have a kid. And he's like, well, it was a hysterical pregnancy. Which is obviously a very intimate detail that he shouldn't have shared.
She puffed up and then she puffed down.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, George tells Nick, well, if I'm going to like manipulate you and control you, I have to get information from you. So thank you for telling me all this. Like, damn.
Well, and then things get a little too close to the truth when it's suggesting that...
because then George tells a story.
Yes.
About a book.
He tells a story about a boy. He doesn't tell him that it was a book he wrote.
Right, that's right.
Which also in turn happens to be maybe about his own life. But all that's up in the air because the major theme of this is all about truth and illusion.
But he tells a story about a young boy who killed his mother and then accidentally killed his father.
Both were accidents.
And then drank a lot of bourbon, which he would call Bergen. But George tells this very transfixing story about it. So now Nick has some stuff on him. But they end up going to... Well, they drive drunk to they all get upset and are driving drunk to take the couple back home. But then Honey sees a club and they have dancing and she wants to dance. So they stop, and then things get even more out of control.
Well, it's like at the most depressing little hole of a dance club because no one is there.
No one is in there. They are drunk as hell.
Sandy's dancing around saying she danced like the wind, which the dancing in this movie is lodged in my adolescent mind because
it's something to see.
It's something to see because at a point, sometimes I feel like I want to channel what Liz Taylor's doing. Which
because she's
ridiculous.
almost doing some, like I could see Beyonce stealing this choreography.
It's transfixing, and she also seems bored, and it's like, oh, I want to seem like that, but I probably seem like Sandy Dennis.
Yeah, you seem more like her. But then Martha starts telling the story of how that little story about the boy and the dead mom and dad, that's George. Mm-hmm. George killed his parents and tried to write a book about it, and Martha's dad told him, you cannot publish this shit.
Which metaphorically is also kind of like a stillborn child.
So, of course, George is upset. And he's like, oh, y'all want to tell stories? Let me tell a story. And then he tells the story about, oh, I wrote a second book about this drunk bitch who had a fake pregnancy. And it's just like...
Well, because it's Sandy Dennis, Honey is so drunk, but the detail is her life. So she's like kind of giving it, and then she...
Oh my gosh. The way these people are talking, it's like, you watch... Well, you don't, but like I watch these Real Housewives reunions where they think they're giving something, and it's like, y'all could never be as vile as these two people. Because it's so like...
No, but then you have the quips from George all the time that are just like he's dancing circles around all of them because he's very smart and witty, which the housewives cannot do.
Well, because I think sometimes people who think they're being shady is like when they're unrelenting, like a Bianca Del Rio. It's kind of like it gets boring after a while. Mm-hmm. But these characters are written, specifically George and Martha, in a way where it's like there are highs and lows. Like they know when to temper it and make you feel comfortable enough that you let your guard down, and then it's back at it. And I think that the person who wrote this,
Edward Albee, but it was adapted by Ernest Lehman, who adapted like Sound of Music and The King and I.
So I don't know how much from the original play.
I read once that he maintained quite a bit.
So impressive. Mm-hmm. Like. Yeah, it's so impressive. But anyway, a funny moment when George is telling the story about the hysterical pregnancy. At first, Honey is like, "Oh, I like this story," and then she's like, "Wait, this story sounds familiar."
She's like, "I know these people."
And then I know these people. And then she's like, "I don't think I want to hear the rest of the story." And then there's some fighting, and then Honey is like, "Violence, violence!" Like,
but the culmination of that scene when it's finally revealed that, and it dawns on her that it's about her, and she runs and screams and cries. Like, I still find it kind of a very powerful, emotional moment.
Oh yes, and then the last part about the bar scene I want to mention is it took the bartender so long to come and check on these people. Well, they are causing a damn ruckus.
The table's been knocked over and Martha's been strangled a bit.
And there has been physical violence and screaming. And then finally the bartender comes out like, y'all okay? We tried to close. I thought that was funny. So they go back to So Martha and George get really upset at each other. And then she basically goes like, this is it. We're done. It's war. And then she leaves George at the bar.
She drives
off with Honey and Nick,
who are on the side of the road that tried to leave.
she picks them up and they go back home. And Honey is in the car drunk as hell, passed out. And Martha and Nick go upstairs and have sex, or try to.
Yeah.
George walks all the way back, finds Honey. She's drunk as hell. And he's trying to explain to her, like, you know, you do realize what's going on up here. And that turns into a scene. And George is like, how am I going to get back at Martha? So it's important to know, when the couple first came over, of course, they were asking basic questions. Do you have a kid? Blah, blah, blah. And then Martha tells Nick that they have a 16-year-old son. So that's brought up a couple...
she tells Honey.
Or she tells Honey. And so it's brought up a couple of times, but clearly Martha and George don't want to talk about it. So as the audience, you might assume like maybe the son died, but then they're saying like he ran away and he wasn't happy at home. So towards the end of the film, when George realizes Martha's having sex or tried to have sex with Nick, he's like, well, I know how I'm going to get back at her. I'm going to tell her our son is dead. And he does. And she becomes hysterical. And then she explains. And so to the audience, we understand. This son they're talking about is like pretend. Mm-hmm. It's a make-believe son that they've just conjured up. And they had agreed that they would never do that. Mm-hmm. So him doing that is like the lowest of blows. But...
Well, no, he said part of the agreement has always been that I could kill him whenever I want.
Oh, sure.
But the agreement was that they're not supposed to talk about him in front of company.
But before that happens, I think a moment that was very powerful for me is when they get to their lowest low and Nick thinks he has something on them because he's like, yeah, I slept with your wife, blah, blah, blah. And then it's clear that they're not mad at each other and that they know what's going on. And that you're the joke. And then they start calling him a houseboy.
Yeah.
And I just thought like, yeah, because, you know, I often get comments about my own relationship. You know, people want to give their 2 cents and give advice. And it's like, you really don't. I mean, you know, even people who know me don't know we don't know the details of anyone's relationship. And you could end up looking like a fool thinking that you're going to like wiggle your way in there. So I thought this is the epitome of...
Oh, yeah, I love the part where they both kind of turn on him and snarl.
Yeah, like they're toxic as a hell, but they're still like a partnership and they're still like, you know, they have each other's backs. And I thought, you know, it's a very unhealthy relationship that I don't aspire to be in, but it's kind of magical watching it. And to think that Nick character thought that maybe he had something on them.
Well, because they both have revealed that like there's a tenderness between them. There's one... early on when they're lying down in bed together and he jokes to her that she's going bald too, and then she has the moment where she's smoking in the screen window about how there's really only one man she's ever loved, and
that's a very good moment.
Nick scoffs at when she says it's George, my husband, and she's like, well, what do you know?
Well, and it's like, well, what do you think? Like, I married his ass. Like, obviously, there was something there at some point that I hold on to.
I don't remember which critic it was, but when I first showed this to you when we were dating, when I had a movie night for it, and I made dump cake.
What a dump cake.
Somebody suggested that Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is a film, if you're a married couple, that you should trot out every couple of years and revisit. And, you know... like 14 years later, since I've probably seen it last, it's funny how the resonance changes with a lot of it. But I think you can really see yourself and tendencies in all 4 of these people.
Yeah.
Albee also wrote a film. A major theme of his work, I've only read 2 of his plays, that are about truth and illusion, because the title is that. It's a reference to a joke Martha had made at the party of academics, where Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf becomes Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and how it's about who's afraid of kind of giving up your illusions to sit uncomfortably in reality, because that's what drinking is. That's what all this escapism is. It's this people that don't want to confront themselves, and that's what this pretend child represents, and a delicate balance, which Tony Richardson made into a film starring Katharine Hepburn, also very much plays with that. And there's always this ambiguity in the background and this menace, which I love.
I also like the idea of illusion, because I always say this, and you don't like it, but I usually say it because I think it's partially funny. But like when people say, how do you make like a relationship work for so long? I always say like a part of me had to die in order to... But really what I think I'm saying is like the part of me that thinks that I can just sort of like have control of my life completely and go about it without thinking about the other person is probably the mistake a lot of people make. But I also think there's a part of it that's also like fantasy and illusion. Like some of it's make believe, like, and you say this too. Like sometimes you kind of just have to like pretend that it's okay, and that can be like the stopgap for like to
You
get
have
back to a good place.
Yeah, you have to have the stopgaps because there are some problems that are too big. You can't fix in one day or
Right.
a week or a month. Like there are things that you need to work on, and things that are just so exhausting to work on that you literally do need the illusion.
And I think
you
George
need
and
the escape.
Martha are like a really twisted but perfect representation of that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I mean, this is like a super toxic relationship, but it's very powerful.
It's powerful, and again, Mike Nichols' first film, and I mean, he did The Graduate, and I think that's what he wanted.
Well,
first
you may have more to say, but I would say that I would give this movie 4.5 out of 5. I feel like it's hard to say it's perfect just because it's based on something.
Sure, but the adaptation of it from a stage to a screen, I think they do a really great job in, as they can, opening it up with the outside scene and the dance.
I think it's nearly perfect, but I think they also lucked out with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton.
Getting this real life couple that I think all screamed at each other a lot anyway. I actually forget how many times they really did work together, but I also, like John Waters, love Boom, which I know
boom.
but which again is this couple screeching at each other a lot, and as John Waters called that film like failed art, and I agree that film's more camp, and there's a level that this avoids that, even though there are scenes that are outrageous and funny and also very painful.
If you like campy, shady things, if you just like seeing people be vile to each other, if you haven't seen this movie, you have to watch it.
Oh yeah, this is a must see film, but also for its historical value, but all the elements of what makes to me this is a 5-star film, because I could really watch this at any time, even with its lulls. But you have to think, previous to this, the two of them started in the Sandpiper. 1959. So you watched this whole last film thinking it was the film I wrote my thesis on.
Well, okay, go ahead.
Sure, but I wrote my thesis on Suddenly Last Summer, which I really love that film. But that is when she.
I don't know how that was relevant to shade me, but go ahead. Go.
So at that point, 1959, Liz Taylor has had this well-publicized affair with Eddie Fisher, who was married to Debbie Reynolds, and she was nominated for an Oscar that year, and everybody thought she would have won, but she didn't, because she was being punished, is kind of the thing. And that's why in 1960 she won an Oscar, like a makeup Oscar, for Butterfield 8, which is I think her performance is fine, but that's really not a good film. And then we had the debacle that was Cleopatra, right? And that's where she met Richard Burton. So this film is like a crystallization of so many elements, both inside and outside of their relationship, that I don't think they were ever really able to repeat personally or professionally. Even though I am a fan of a lot of the choices Liz Taylor made in her career in the late 60s and 70s, but like Demi Moore in the 90s, they were all flops. So I don't know. I just think this film accomplishes something special that a lot of us are trying always to do, and it just, the stars aligned. I don't know. It's a film that feels that way to me. Also won an Oscar for art direction and costume design. George Segal didn't win. I think it's, Richard Burton didn't win, and I think this should have been a win for him. He lost to Paul Scofield for A Man for All Seasons. Again, that's a really good performance too, but I don't know. The chance, the very reality that this played somewhere in this city on my birthday, I was like, oh, this is where I have to be.
Yeah. Anything else?
Well, I feel like we didn't talk enough about Sandy Dennis, who, if you like this film, oh my God, her and Robert Altman's That Cold Day in the Park, which I need to make you watch that, is a really weird, great movie. But her performance in Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean. And prior to this, which Sandy Dennis won her Oscar for, I think her only other role was a supporting part in Splendor in the Grass. But she's just such an odd, interesting screen presence, and she just nails it every scene. I don't know. There's one scene where she's so drunk that her mouth is salivating. If you've been around drunk people, it's like, oh, she could have been really drunk there. I don't know. Again, it's one for the ages.
All done?
Sure.
Hit the thanks button. Listen to our podcast. Bye.